To Hi everybody, I am Lorianne. I am that gal, and tonight we are that gal with that guy, and I am with my partner.
I am that guy. My name is Roy Miller from Dallas, Texas, and here's how we see it. So last week we talked about baby boomers and Generation Xers. So uh, just to kind of go back a little bit, we were talking about things that defined baby boomers, things that happened during our lifetime, like the Rosa Parks sitting at the back of the bus, the Cuban Missile Crisis, President Kennedy getting assassinated, Martin Luther King getting assassinated, uh, Robert Kennedy getting assassinated, the moon landing, and some other things. But that's just a kind of a broad overview as a things that affected the baby boomers. So for Generation Xers, what would you say, Lorianne?
Well, we didn't, I mean, we were very young. Some of us, I mean, like I was saying last week, I remember Robert Kennedy, but I don't remember the other stuff. I heard about it. I grew up more in the disco time. You know, we were talking about that with John Travolta. You always say it better than us. Saturday Night Fever,
Yeah.
um, Airplane. Our biggest thing was because I actually, and I don't think that the Canadians or North Americans were nearly as affected by it, but definitely the Americans and the communist Russia, that was an issue back then.
Mhm.
A little bit fear of bombings and such like that, but more it was away from North America mostly. So we really didn't see that extent of a change of that. We experienced the history of it, but not so much there and then. But as I was saying, is I think our biggest thing was watching all these boomers, we go out to get a job and all of a sudden all the jobs are taken because there's this like big boom of people ahead of us. Uh, so we had to, make ends meet in different ways. But kind of a different generation, but we also, and our music really, when I meet with my friends that are more boomers, the music differences are a little different too. I mean, we grew up more so, like I said, with, the Bee Gees and that, those are the things we listen to more so. But anyway, but I think that you've got a great story tonight that you're going to be talking to us about the difference between
Yeah, and
our
so
generations.
just to put things into perspective, I mean, to really give you an idea of, of what people see during their lifetime and how it changes from generation to generation to generation. So, I'm going to call this perspective. I want you to go back and think if you were born in 1900, and there's some pretty incredible things. Uh, so if you were born in 1900, on your 14th birthday, World War One started, and it ended when you were 18. So pretty much your high school years, basically. Uh, Later in that year, the Spanish flu epidemic hit, and it goes to your 20th birthday. So you've already been, as a teenager, through a world war and then a pandemic. It's, I mean, wow, that's hard to imagine. Of course, we've had our own little pandemic now, but not near what this was, thankfully, thank God. So on your 29th birthday, the Great Depression hits,
Mm.
and unemployment is 25%. The world GDP drops 27%, and that goes until you're 33 years old. There's another 4 years of your life that were probably pretty miserable. Uh, the country almost collapses uh, with the world economy. And then to round that off, when you're 39, World War II starts. So you've already been through two wars, a pandemic, the crash of the stock market, and you're not even 40 years old yet. And you think about being a baby boomer, what I went through up to 40 years old, basically the counterculture, mainly. That's the things I remember the most. But so, the World War II starts. I mean, you're not even over the hill yet, and all of a sudden on your 41st birthday, the United States, excuse me, is pulled into World War II until you're 45 years old. So, I mean, it's just one after another, right? And then at 50, the Korean War starts. And so it's just war. Then at 55, Vietnam starts. Now, Vietnam, when I was in my junior high, particularly my high school years, Vietnam was ramping up. And pretty much when you got out of high school, you were going to Vietnam. I mean, that was, you were getting drafted, you were going straight to Vietnam. Fortunately, I wasn't drafted when I got out of high school. From 18 to 19, they wouldn't call you up. And then in 19, you went to a lottery. They drew numbers. And I'll never forget the night they drew the numbers. My number was 316. And so that night they said the first 100 would go immediately. And I was in the lottery for a year. I was subject to being drafted for a year. And my year was up, and they were in about like 250. They'd called up people from 1 to 250. So a little interesting side note about that is after my year was up, I got married in June, and in August I came home from work and I had a letter from the Selective Service, and I almost had a heart attack. So I thought they were drafting me, but they just reclassified me to not presently acceptable military service, which thank God. However, back then a lot of people were going to Canada to avoid the draft. I wouldn't have. I mean, if I would have went if I got drafted. I mean, I would have done my duty. But anyway, little side note there. So that was at 55. Vietnam starts. Then at 62, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I remember as a kid, I remember that. That was a big deal. I can remember coming from school, my mother crying because she said, we're going to go to war, you know, and all this stuff. I remember that very well.
That's when they had the bunkers and everything, and they started the underground.
and I mean, you know, and at that time, everybody thought that was going to end the world. I mean, that was the real thought process of everybody. That, you know, that's it. Our life's over. That was when you're 62. Then at 75, Vietnam finally ends. The war in Vietnam finally ended when these people were 75 years old. So we look at things now and think about how things are changing. You know, we've had a lot. 2020 has been an unusual year. Actually, 2016 to 2020 has been a pretty interesting time in America with all the political stuff going on. So it's been, but you know, but can you imagine your whole from 1900 to your 75, 3 wars, and all depression, pandemic? I mean, that's just incredible.
But here's another thing. My grandfather was born in 1903, and I remember speaking to him, and he passed away when he was 93. Just imagine 93 years. When he passed away, I was in my 30s, so the internet was already there. So he went, even if you look at it from, you know, almost like, you know, horse and buggy kind of time, to where the cars came in, the cars became that, and all of those things, including the technology that came around in just his 93 years. I mean, and somebody say, well, that's 93 years. That's not a lot if you look at the scope of life. Like, wow.
No, and you know, it's funny you say that because my wife's grandmother was born like in the late 1890s. Okay, when we got married, her grandmother was like in 80 something years old. But talking to her, because I mean, you're talking about horse and buggy, the car, I mean, and all the other things that just like, you know,
Airplanes?
Right. And she had a very, very clear and distinctive memory of a lot of things. It's really interesting to talk to her. You know, I mean, even my grandmother, I can remember talking to my grandmother, you know, she was back during the Depression, she was a cook in the in a mining camp in Colorado, you know, and just talk about, you know, the what they call them, the mining company going in, and they would actually build a little town. Everybody worked for the mining company, bought, you know what I mean? And so and she was talking about all that, and just, you know, I don't know. I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and it was a great time. I mean, I wouldn't take for it. I mean, it was. I can remember, you know, in the 60s when everything started to change. Like, let's say music went from the doo-wop to the what we call classic rock, the heavy metal, the all that. I mean, it really changed a lot. I mean, a lot. And you know, I still listen to that music to this day. I mean, to me, that was the best music. But you know, it's interesting to talk to older people to find out things that you know you don't hear. They'll tell you little anecdotes that you never hear, you know. And I always found that very interesting. Of course, now then, I guess I'm the old people that, you know.
I was going to say that, because if you talk to a younger person and talk about, you know, baud rate and floppy disks and, you know, things that we started, like I was in my 20s when I got on my first computer, as we talked about last time. And, you know, wow, 300 baud, what's that? You know, what's a baud? Like, there's no such thing. So yes, we are. But I still am fascinated just thinking about, you know, I'm excited that I got to see the, you know, growth of technology. But my grandfather, just to watch, like I said, you know, a car, an airplane. I mean, those were, to actually lived through that period where there was none and then there is exciting, you know. The wars were not, definitely not. We had some friends who were in the, oh my goodness, I'm not going to remember this one. The Japanese, when they attacked Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor.
And they were survivors. And when we lived in Turkey, they were our neighbors, and they were fascinating to listen to. They just sat there, they were watching it. They were on the shore watching the ships being blown up. It was like, I can't imagine that. Don't want to. I don't want to.
I had an uncle that was in the Navy, and he said that, and I mean, he couldn't. It's hard for him to talk about it. But I remember one time somebody asked him about something, and he got real choked up, and he said he was standing on the deck, and he looked around, and his best friend was gone. And I mean, still to this day, he gets choked up. You know, it just, you know, I can't imagine experiencing that. You know, and people, a lot of people didn't know. When I remember when I was a kid, they didn't want to talk about it. But they were there. They, you know, even a lot of people in Vietnam, they don't want to talk about it.
No, and that was really painful, all the post-traumatic stress disorder. And we have a lot more knowledge today about that. But back then we didn't have that. And yeah, I still remember, I think I might have been probably 6 or 7. And one of my friends' fathers was leaving for the war. That would have been the Vietnam, I would imagine, at my age at that time. And I was bothered by, and yet I'm still too young to really understand it. But I saw war movies on TV, so that scared me enough to say, oh my goodness, if my dad had to go, and in Canada, of course, you weren't drafted, it was volunteer to go. And they did. They served the country to back it up. But it gave me the chills as a child of like 6 years old. I still remember that. Don't know much about what transpired. We were living in Turkey. That was a whole different thing. Like I said, through the whole big part of the Vietnam, and I was still too young to understand it. That's a little bit of the difference between you and I. Again, you know, the GenXers, we hear about it, and we did see snippets of it. We remember a little bit of it as kids, but the 1900s, yeah, to haven't gone through all that's phenomenal.
Yeah, it's like, it's funny because like my grandkids, you know, I mean, you know how much technology they have now, you know, 10, 12 years old. things they can do that, I was 60 years old before I learned how to do, you know what I mean? And they're always going, Granddad, back in the olden days, did y'all have this,
And the other thing too is if anything is 3 years old, it's old now.
Yeah.
Whereas, like it took for years for anything to become old when we were younger. But still though, I'm still driving a 2002 Santa Fe, okay? So like there's some cars that still can last longer than
I can remember, the little TI calculator was about the size of this iPhone, but it was about an inch and a half thick. And I remember getting the calculator. It did add, subtract, and multiply, divide, percentages, and square root. That was all it do. And this was back in 1971, $100.
Wow.
Now you can buy a graphic calculator for $10. I mean, it's just, it's crazy. It's crazy.
I did like the fact though that when we went into school, when I was there, I don't know, but they were still expensive when we got them. And of course, but they also became a lot more, you could actually do all sorts of statistics on them. But, you walk into a class, you had to put that, you were not allowed to keep it away, not allowed on your desk. And what's funny though, is that's where schools should be going with the phones, because it's not even about learning. At least us, it was a calculator, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
Not something for social. I mean, no, it was not at all social. It was about learning. But yeah, no, they had us use our brains. And I appreciate that though. I can still do multiplication. What is it? Multiplication tables.
Yeah. Well, of course, we call them the times tables.
We did that too. Yeah.
Kids, you need to learn your times tables. You need to learn your times table. So.
I'll say this really quickly, and if Mr. Jones is still alive and still out there, and if he sees this at all, he was great. It was really into that, and he would bring us in, and every morning the first thing that we had to do, we had those circles, and there were about 7 of them, and we had to do them, and we only had so much time to do it, and you multiply, and you get it done. And I really appreciate that. I think there's a lot of value in that. So while other teachers were not teaching that, he was. It was his thing. So thank you, Mr. Jones.
Yep. So I just thought that was an interesting, this thing about perspective, to look at what in my almost 70 years, what I saw versus what somebody in 1900 saw.
Yeah.
In their lifetime. I'm glad I was a baby boomer, not in 1900.
Me too. Now, this is as a really quick one, because I know we're running short on time here, but I remember when my son was born, because we lived in Reno for 3 years, and of course he got his dual citizenship. My biggest fear that there was going to be a draft again. People go, there's not going to be a draft again. Never say never. We probably thought there'd never be a pandemic again. And here it is. So, biggest fear.
Well, that was good. It's just interesting to see how good you have it compared to the people before you.
Absolutely. I agree. I am very grateful for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And in the final word too, we wouldn't be here saying hi to each other face to face if this had happened in the 1900s. There was very much isolation when those pandemics occurred, and now at least we can reach out, which we're very lucky about as well. Super lucky.
Yep.
Okay.
So that's everything we have for tonight. Appreciate everybody listening. We'll always have something hopefully entertaining and interesting for you. So always come back.
And we are going to just set this too. Is there anybody out there? Do you have something that you want to talk about? We'd be more than happy to interview you. Just get a hold of us. You can reach us at on email. It's pretty simple. It's Lorianne@iamthatgal.com. But you can also find us on podcast, That Gal with That Guy. get a hold of us. We'd love to interview you. We're also on Facebook, That Gal with That Guy. We also have a group, so join our group. We'd love to see you there. And, yes, sorry, Roy, but yeah, please, we'd love to interview.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks, everybody. We appreciate it.
Thank you, and have a great night, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye. I am That Gal.
I am That Guy.
Take care.
Bye.